Morning Talk with Siki Mgabadeli.
On SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Thanks to Asanda, back with us at 11:30 with your headlines. We're broadcasting live from the International Congress of Psychology at the Cape Town International Convention Centre. It's the 30th International Congress of Psychology, and it's been organized by the National Research Foundation of South Africa and the Psychological Society of South Africa, in partnership with some key South African universities and the Psychological Association of neighboring countries. And it's being held under the theme Psychology Serving Humanity. And it's an important theme given what we're about to talk about right now. And that's a documentary titled Doctors of the Dark Side. And it exposes the scandal behind what was, of course, itself a scandal, the torture scandal. So the way that psychologists and physicians implemented and then covered up the torture of detainees in US-controlled military prisons. The stories of 4 detainees and the doctors involved in their abuse shows how essential doctors have been to the torture program. So the documentary was actually shown to the delegates this morning while we were on air, so I wasn't able to see it, but I did see a trailer of it on the website, and the trailer itself is quite chilling. I cannot imagine what the full-length documentary looks like, but we're going to talk about that because also straight after that there was a panel discussion just debating the issues that arose from the documentary, so we'll talk about that as well. You can call us on 0891 104 207 or send us an SMS to 34701. Those are at a cost of R2. My guest this morning, Michael Wessels, who is psychosocial support and peace building. Wait, no, that is not your title, Michael. I'm like, oh, as I'm reading it, I'm like, that doesn't sound like a title. So you'll tell me where you're from.
I'm a professor at Columbia University. I'm a long-term humanitarian worker and a former president of Psychologists for Social Responsibility, and I was also one of 2 peace delegates to the PENS task force of the American Psychological Association.
Okay, we'll touch on that as well in a moment. Dr. Paul Kimmel is chair of the Culture of Peace Committee at the International Psychologists for Social Responsibility, and Umesh Bauer, psychology lecturer at the University of the Western Cape.
Yes, I am.
Got that right. Fantastic. So, Michael, you're the only one that I didn't know for sure. So, as I said, you've just watched this documentary, talked about it, and maybe I'll start with you. Paul, what did you make of it?
Well, I've seen this 4 times. The woman who produced this, who directed this, is a person that I've been in touch with for a number of years, and a colleague of mine said, perhaps you ought to see if you could get this shown at the International Congress, because this will be of interest to a lot of people in a lot of countries. So through Umesh and through Shanaz Sufla, who I had been writing a paper with, I proposed this as a session, and when you propose something, you get to be the moderator. So I was the moderator for this film. I find it very powerful, very compelling, and I raised the question with the audience, think about this in your country. We probably had 100 people, I'm guessing, in that audience. And asking them, is this kind of thing, could this happen with your psychological association? Could this happen professionally, and what could you do about it?
What was their reaction when the credits rolled?
Well, first we had a panel, and we 3 were on that, and we talked about some of the things that we've run into, and I can get into some of that later. But when we got to the questions, we got more statements, actually, than questions. We got people saying, well, this is powerful. What can we do? How can we handle this? We've got other people saying, I've been able to do this and that and the other thing. And what we need is some kind of accountability. We need a way to reinforce the kind of things we're doing positively. On the other side, we got people saying, why didn't you invite somebody from the APA to come to this session? And we said we did not intend this to be a discussion or a controversy. We intended this to get across a point of view. And that was what's going on with our professional organization and how it might affect psychologists worldwide.
And Michael, what were your impressions?
Well, I was horribly upset and put off, reviled, disgusted, angry.
Wow.
You know, what we saw is the abrogation of human rights, of human rights on a very large scale that was actually supported by the U.S. government, dictated by it. And to see health and psychological professionals describing their main role as working for the Department of Defense rather than as clinicians who were there to protect the well-being of the detainees was for me very chilling.
What happened to the oath, first do no harm?
Well, the do no harm principle can be deconstructed as only one principle. And the other principle is, at least in the APA Code of Ethics, is Principle B, which calls for preventing harm. And the argument, which I do not support, is that the U.S. was under threat from external terrorists, and that greater harm could be prevented by taking the gloves off and engaging in these harmful, illegal, coercive interrogations. But I think that what we learned was that psychologists operated under a very narrow U.S. biased definition of the law, what is legal. Instead of working with international human rights standards and taking that as their benchmarks, as should be, that they should be the basis of any reasonable professional code of ethics. But instead what happened was people said, no, we want to stay within the boundaries of U.S. law. And U.S. law does make it possible to engage in coercive interrogations, and I'm sorry to say the police do some of these kinds of things on a daily level, so it's not just something done to detainees. But there was a self-serving sort of belief that the presence of psychologists in places like Guantanamo actually limited the harm, and I think that the film did a very, very fine job of making the reverse point. That when you've got a health professional present, it sort of reassures the interrogators and the torturers to think that, nothing really harmful is happening here. And so they actually step it up rather than limiting their behavior.
Then pull themselves back. Paul asked a very important question, Umesh, and I want you to maybe pick up on this. We'll do it in a moment. And the broader question, could this happen in your country? And for me, as I said, I've only seen the 2-minute trailer, but that's powerful enough to tell me that the whole documentary must be as powerful as that. So we'll pick up on that question and also maybe get some detail on actually what is in the documentary for those who have not seen it and what it exposes. So we'll do that in a moment. We'll take some calls as well on 0891 104207. SMSs 34701.
Morning Talk with Siki Mgabadeli.
It's 16 minutes past 11 here on SAFM 104 to 107, talking about a documentary titled Doctors of the Dark Side. Michael Wessels, Dr. Paul Kimmel, and Umesh Power, my guests this morning. Umesh, what do you see in this documentary? Let's maybe describe what it actually deals with.
The documentary highlights very, very clearly the complicity of psychologists in torture and the way that professional organizations can have their ethical principles diluted in trying to serve the state. Where, in general, psychologists are responsible for their primary responsibility is to take care of the individual, and that the ethical code is the ethical code and higher order ethical code of taking care of the broader good is more important than the other. Here in this documentary, what they show is how, in trying to keep a narrow view of what an ethical responsibility is, individuals and organizations can get coerced into acting unethically.
And this, is this an isolated incident? The question that Paul was asking. Are those some of the questions that I think the profession is asking themselves today?
It's not an isolated incident. Any time in any state when there's a siege mentality, and Sats Cooper spoke about this on the radio with you previously. When there's a siege mentality, it's the people respond in a way to their base instincts. And in this instance, the call was that the war on terror was the most important thing. The country was under threat, and by any means necessary, find the solutions to stopping this terror. What they did was it encouraged the violation of the basic principles of human rights, which are in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also in the APA's own Code of Ethics.
Yeah.
In South Africa, we have a terrible dark past in which psychologists, and Verwoerd was a psychologist, was part of the developing these policies of apartheid, and that there was a complicity from the established psychology associations in apartheid time to take part in these in the violations. When the new organization was launched in 1994, the SAISA, which brought together the one united psychology association, was based on the principles of human rights, and the constitution of SAISA is very, very strong that a human rights framework is what guides it, and that it takes primacy over anything else.
Well, for me, it is again all about accountability. Are psychologists holding each other accountable?
I think there was a time when they did. I've worked for many years with the American Psychological Association. I was one of the first public policy fellows there. And at that particular point in time, I felt that they served the constituency of psychologists within the United States.
Yeah.
They were a little more militaristic than my preferences would have been, but they would sign on to documents like the legislation to establish the United States Academy of Peace, which is now the U.S. Institute of Peace. So with some pressure and with the appropriate nudging, we could get them to do things that I felt was serving the population of psychologists. Once we got to 2012 and 2011, and the bombing in the towers, and once we got the Bush administration saying you're either for us or against us, we saw a very definite shift away from that, serving the psychology people and serving humanity in the longer term, to a confrontational, closed system where you have to come to us to get permission to do things, and when you do something we don't like, we're going to make sure it doesn't get publicity, or maybe in many cases doesn't even get any action taken on it. So I felt that we moved from an open system serving the population that's supposed to be its constituency to a confrontational closed system where you have to come to them. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen in other places. I'm afraid it may.
And we'll touch on that. I want to hear what Michael thinks about that. But we've got to take a call from Bashir in Lenasia. Hi, Bashir.
Hello, Sigi.
Hi, morning.
Hi, and to your guest. Look, with respect to your guest, I think the horror goes really beyond the medical profession. I can understand the concern with it, but I believe that there's collaboration, between the medical profession and politicians. Has set back the cause of human rights 100 years. America was always used as a kind of a milestone that every other society on earth has to reach. First is the land of the free and human rights and so forth. But then America has never really been challenged or put under any pressure. And, I think, ironically, 9/11 and Al-Qaeda has done that. They have put America under pressure as regards their human rights, record and so forth. And America simply fell to pieces, and so did the medical profession. And I think the worst aspect of all this is how they try to rationalize the breaking down of human rights, saying that, look, we're under pressure, and therefore we have the right to do so and so. When, ironically, surely, human rights come really into effect when you are under pressure. When everything goes smoothly,
it's easy to be humanitarian.
And I think this is the problem, and I think America has shown that they've simply become sort of sophisticated barbarians using the law to do what they please, and I fear that because of this, other countries now will simply say, well, look, if America can do that, well, why can't we?
Why can't we? All right, I've got to move on. Thanks, Bashir. What do you make of that, Mike? I've never heard. What did you call it? Sophisticated barbarians.
Sophisticated barbarians. I don't know how sophisticated. It's more bare knuckles these days.
Michael?
But Bashir, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, I think it's there's some valid elements there. One of the things that has happened is there's a very strong American exceptionalism, which wants to somehow set the U.S. Aside from the rule by international law and from the application of the Geneva Conventions and international human rights standards. And to that extent, I would say we are quite barbaric by 20th century standards. And I would fault the APA in its response. When these bad things happen, then the question is, how does one respond? And I would say that today, the APA is in the position of that's similar to what would happen if it were 1920, some 50 years beyond the end of slavery in the U.S. South, and the APA would be there still debating slavery. So I mean, I think the response has been too little, too late. When there's an abrogation of human rights, and when there's a twisting of codes of ethics, and when psychologists and health professionals engage in these wrongful activities, there has to be investigation and accountability. But even more important in this particular case, there has to be a question about how did we come to this place? And what was it about our code of ethics that enabled this? And here I would trace back to the PENS process, because that was the presumed APA effort to try to take a look at, does the current APA ethics code deal with the kinds of situations that are coming up post 9/11? And the answer that the PENS report gave, regrettably, was that it is, if you stay within the bounds of what is safe, legal, and ethical, then you're okay. Where the legalities were defined in terms of the Bush administration's twisting of U.S. law away from civil liberties, and held out the right to torture people. And they actually redefined torture away from delivering significant harm, whether it be physical or psychological, to defining torture as something that causes severe organic damage. But we as psychologists can be very quick to say that it's the psychological torture that leaves the deepest wounds. So psychology itself needs to reconstruct itself. This is a case that is the antithesis of psychology serving humanity. This is a case of psychology engaging in barbarity specifically for the purpose of protecting national security. And I think the question for all professionals is, what is the highest obligation? Is it to national security? Or is it to international human rights standards? The APA has not gone on record making international human rights standard the foundation of its ethics code. That needs to happen.
And that's at the heart of it, isn't it, Umesh? I mean, I think Bashir is saying this has set us back 100 years.
In a way it has, but what is also an opportunity for us to be able to, as activists who have the will of the people, if we put it like that, or the interests of the society, or the well-being of the interests of society and its well-being at heart. This is an opportunity to be able to do this sort of thing, which is to raise the issues around human rights and see how psychologists and medical personnel are not above the highest human rights standard, that they need to be able to adhere to that, and that becomes the most important thing.
And the thing is, people come to you when they are at their most vulnerable. They're exposed to a doctor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist when you are at your most vulnerable, right?
And when you see the person in the room who is supposedly watching the torture, is supposedly the doctor to help you, and they're the person that's taking away the medication, or they're the person that's telling them to ramp up the torture, you can't trust them anymore. And so it destroys any possibility of bringing in any kind of outside help. But let me say something a little further about the question about the medical profession in general. Much of the film was about physicians.
Yes.
And the psychologists were mentioned more toward the end. But we do know that the AMA, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association is not the same thing. The AMA and the psychiatrists have gone on record as saying anyone who takes part in interrogations is subject to censure and can lose their license. APA has not done this.
Do we know why?
Well, they keep things very quiet. I know for a fact, having served on the Council of APA, which is supposedly the governing body, that it is not the governing body. That the Board of Directors has a lot more say about what goes on. And the Board of Directors has a lot of influence from the kind of people that Mike was talking about, the military psychologist in Division 19. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
Michael, you wanted to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a matter of some speculation. First of all, there are ideological differences. And I think that the APA took its position at a time when the Bush administration was willing to go after any organization that broke ranks with what the Bush administration was recommending, the torture, the inhumane treatment. The APA has established itself as a very conservative organization that does not want to be out of step with the mainstream. So that's the first thing. But then the second thing that has to be said is that large numbers of psychologists get their money from the military. Huge amounts of grant money flow in this way. There are a lot of jobs to be done. And then the other thing is that you got to remember that psychologists and health professionals are also U.S. citizens. And it is true that U.S. citizens were manipulated in very clever ways by the Bush administration. The panic button was pressed and the fear was ramped up. And the obligation was presented that you have to do your part to protect national security. So it's as if it heightened the salience of national security and gave permission to trump existing ethical standards.
And it's interesting, the point that Bashir was making, that 9/11 was possibly the thing that really tested that American exceptionalism that you were talking about a little bit earlier. We're going to find out what we can learn from this, and also just take some calls and read some SMSs as well.
Morning Talk with Siki Mgabadeli.
And it's 25 minutes to midday here on SAFM 104 to 107, talking about the documentary Doctors of the Dark Side, in conversation with Michael Wessels, who is professor at Columbia University. Dr. Paul Kimmel is with the International Psychologist for Social Responsibility, and Umesh Bauer is with the University of the Western Cape. Let's take a call from Naim in Alberton. Hi, Naim.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
Greetings to you and your guests. I think we're facing a problem rather than just that facing the medical profession or psychologists. You know, we've got a whole inversion of all sectors of society. Take, for example, the legal profession. I mean, in American, the attorney generals and everybody else basically twisted and turned definitions and whatever else they did. Not only that, the Red Cross visited all these sites. They were also kind of mummified. Again, you have this red tape and you get definitions and you get technicalities and agreements. And, in this legalese, the whole world, we've all kind of been so mummified, right? And then even ordinary citizens, experiment was done where they mocked electric shock treatment, and ordinary citizens were prepared to give massive doses beyond that, causing harm, and under instructions that, well, it's vital for national security. And they all, a majority of them actually complied with this. And so we actually have got a brainwashing, or in your guest may prefer the term conditioning, of the whole society, basically of the whole world, into this whole kind of paranoia. And I think we need to actually question the basic premise. Was America actually attacked? What if the whole premise is actually wrong? This will make it, doubly more dastardly that if the whole premise is wrong, if America wasn't attacked by any radicals or fanatics, if this was an inside job, and increasingly the evidence, scientific evidence, architects, engineers, are coming up with anomalies in the official story. Right. So if the premise itself is wrong, this makes, what is the psychological impact if America has made a self-inflicted wound, and now is then perpetrating its horrendous practices throughout the world. I think we need to actually open up that debate, and you know, can the world actually come to grips with that reality?
All right. Thanks to Naeem in Alberton. Have we been mummified?
I think we've been more than mummified. I think Naeem makes an interesting point in which the governments and societies and our own South African society manufacture consent. Noam Chomsky spoke very nicely about how by getting people to buy into a certain viewpoint with coercion, that a certain viewpoint and a certain anti-human rights and an oppressive viewpoint can be taken forward. We've seen this. We've seen that in the example here in the US, but we also see it all over the world, where regimes that are illegitimate, and we've seen it in South Africa, where apartheid was perpetrated for a long time, and also where there was buying from society in this. I think the two important points that come up here are one, that we have an ethical responsibility within ourselves as individuals to be able to address the issues of concern in the day. In our own country, as psychologists, as activists, as ordinary citizens, our responsibility is to hold our leaders, ourselves, to the highest standard required of them, and that is and that's I'm reminded by something that Nelson Mandela had said at his inauguration, which is that never again, you know, in our land will we see oppression of one against the other. And we now are a long way down the road, and yet we see the same kinds of things happening in our country, but also more widely. And as psychologists, our responsibility is to address it not only on an individual level. I think this is something I want to emphasize, that it goes beyond the individual. It's the collective, and on a collective level we have a responsibility as psychologists or as citizens to be able to have a reflective process within ourselves of how we contribute to the difficulties, but how also we can contribute to change. And the change is the change in the mindset of people, but one that has an ethical human rights perspective. In the same way, it was quite surreal a moment ago, and we were talking between ourselves that we had the market report, and the market report was talking about the Dow Jones and how the rand is falling, and that conversation and that sense of being pervades the world. In the same way, I think, you know, as psychologists, and both Paul and Mike advocate for having human rights and high ethical standards pervade it in the same way that the market pervades one's psyche.
Well, let's not talk about markets and sanity.
I've actually made a proposal that we need indicators, Dow Jones be what it may, or the leading economic indicators or whatever else. We need indicators of sustainability of a system, whether it's an organization or a country, in terms of the ecology, which we're ruining, and also of cultural understanding of individuals. How clear are you that you and I can look at the same thing and see something different, hear something different, feel something different, and can we empathize across those differences? If we had those kind of indicators as measures, then we could begin to see when we're making progress. The economic indicators are taking us in a different direction toward what the gentleman was talking about. He was talking about Stanley Milgram's famous experiment with electroshock. The American Psychological Association condemned those experiments. They were eventually banned. You couldn't do that, even though they weren't really shocking anybody, but the fact that they actually were allowed to do that kind of study. Back in the days when APA was doing good things, they said, well, you can't do that sort of thing. Unfortunately, as Mike said, we've moved away from that model, and we're no longer there. We're much more into the culture of war and into finding an enemy. And an enemy is necessary to a culture of war.
Absolutely. I'm going to take one very last call, and please be as brief as possible, and then I'm going to wrap up with my guest. Don in Cape Town. Morning.
Hi, Siki. I'd just like to say this very interesting program, but I think the initial impetus for the program was to sort of look at it how it will happen in other countries. And I think this has just become, and your callers have also indicated it, a very much an American bashing thing. I'll listen on the radio.
All right. Do you feel bashed, Michael?
Well,
let's ask an American.
I'm a loyal American citizen who thinks in this case that my government has done the wrong thing. And so my criticism of the American government is born of love and a desire to have it do the right thing. But I do think you're right that we've focused, because of it is the focus of the film, primarily on the behavior of the U.S. But let's face it, look at Israel, Syria, DRC, countless regimes around the world who are guilty of human rights violations, not through the actions of a few bad apples, but because of a systemic perversion of all of the entire social system to enable and even encourage human rights violations under the name of self-protection and national security. The only way to prevent that is to use a universal standard which defines wrongdoing. Anything less than that makes it possible for dictators and totalitarians to say, this is in our national interest.
Have we not
this
lost
is what has
that
to
universal standard if something like this can happen, and it's happening in many parts of the world, not just in U.S. military prisons?
It can be changed. I think the things that have to happen are, number one, you have to have a clear line that it is inappropriate always and forever, no exceptions, for any psychologist, any health professional to get involved in this. And it doesn't matter whether they're in the U.S., in Syria, or in South Africa, in some other country. Secondly, there has to be procedures of protection for whistleblowers. If whistleblowers are gone after and their lives are made miserable, you will never get any accountability in the system. Third, there has to be accountable process. When individuals engage in wrongdoing, they have to be shown to have done something wrong, and they have to be brought to justice. And on all of these accounts, the APA is failing. It's probably not the only psychological organization in the world that's failing, but this is my particular position. The film was very strong in bringing this to the fore, so I think this is where we individually start.
Hanging my head in shame. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm going to get in lots of trouble if we continue. I would until 12 o'clock. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for giving me your time this morning.